Hello, everybody. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. We have planned an hour for this event. We have 45 minutes of live seminar type discussion and 15 minutes of Q&A. My name is Paul Gagliardo. I've been in the water business for over 30 years, specializing in new technology development. I'm a professional engineer and I have a master's in public health. I'm also the host of the Water Entrepreneur podcast, and I'll be moderating the event today. This live discussion will examine how a collaborative approach to leak detection produces the best overall results. We'll be talking to a technology solution provider, a field inspection leak pinpointing company, and the utility customer. Each of these organizations have their role to play to ensure the best outcomes are achieved. I'd first like to introduce the panelists. We have Eric Trerotola, Senior Sales Manager, ASTERRA North America. Rolf Hechler, Mayor of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Tony Popolo, Operations Manager, McKim Creed. And Barry Hales, VP Asset Management, also of McKim Creed. As you can see, we have a quorum of paisans, so you can imagine that we'll have a very entertaining presentation. So the first thing I want the panelists to discuss is why leak detection is important for water utilities. There are a number of reasons, including financial, regulatory, and constrained supply. So Eric, let's start with you. Can you give me some insight into why your customers are interested in your leak detection solution?
Absolutely, Paul. I would say most of them are interested in reducing their water loss. That's the main goal of everybody. And when we're talking about reducing our water loss, really what we need to do is be more efficient in finding leaks. In order to reduce water loss, we actually have to outpace the rate that they're actually leaking. They're occurring in the system. So you need a very efficient approach. Obviously, you have the regulatory where people are on the so-called naughty list with Christmas coming up in a couple months. And they need to document how they're getting out of it. We have a program that can help them show how they're going and progressing to their goals. And then you have the supply issue. You know, in extreme cases, there's some utilities that are actually getting close to running out of water. So those are the three main ones, I would say, but with the most is reducing water loss.
And Barry, from your perspective, what are the reasons utilities hire McKim Creed to find leaks?
Paul, I'd say it's typically really three things: people, processes, and technology. And it starts with the people. Our people are curious, they're professional, they're informed, and they're committed to the process. And the process, especially in POI follow-ups and what we're discussing today, is a very meticulous process. It is not something that is done on a production level. Our people, when they are on the ground, are hunting rather than hoping. And so they are, again, committed to the process and very meticulous with it. And then the technology, the way we communicate our results, the way we communicate the status of a project, is fully transparent to both the client and ASTERRA. And it makes for a nice, smooth, comprehensive program.
Great. And finally, Rolf, what was Truth or Consequences' interest in performing leak detections in your distribution system?
Sure. Let me just start with a quick description of Truth or Consequences. We have a town of about 6,000 people, just a little over. And, 10 years ago, leaks weren't really a problem. Our system seemed to age overnight. And I think that's true when you have systems that are 60, 70, or 80 years old, right? All of a sudden, something starts breaking and it becomes exponential. And all of a sudden, you have a lot of leaks. It's not unusual for us to have had 300 or 400 leaks in a year. And for a town of 6,000, that's quite significant. So we're really interested in cost savings. The old system of finding leaks through reporting, patrolling just wasn't cutting it for us, and we needed to find a better solution. So this was one of the solutions that we were looking for. It kind of helped us out as far as detecting the leaks, and then later on being able to approach our legislature because we had a map system available because, so that we could show where the leaks were and what the problem was. And so we had to identify all those things in order for us to become successful in getting money from our state legislature. So all of those things came together for us. And that's kind of the reason that we wanted to be interested with you guys.
Great, thank you. And that's it's really interesting you talk about the state. So the focus of this program and this discussion today is going to be on the process that the state of New Mexico implemented in order to meet one of the goals of its Water Plan 2050, the Water Action Plan. This action plan anticipates that New Mexico will have 25% less water in 2050 than it does now. So it's really critical from their perspective that everything can be done to effectively increase supply. So the goals of the water plan include developing new water supplies, protecting watersheds, and promoting conservation. One of the ways New Mexico is going to promote conservation is to reduce leaks in drinking water systems by deploying innovative technologies statewide, again, with the goal to reduce water system leaks by 25%. They're doing this in a unique way. The state is front-funding leak detection services so that small and rural communities can take advantage of new technology developments and economies of scale to find and fix leaks in their system. State has entered into a long-term contract with ASTERRA to scan for leaks across the state in cooperation with local utilities and using the services of McKim Creed to perform the field inspection, boots on the ground pinpointing services. It ensures that non-revenue water is reduced across the state in the most cost-effective and efficient manner. This fiscal year, ASTERRA and McKim Creed will analyze between 200 and 300 utility systems for leaks in New Mexico under this agreement. So let's look at how this process works. We want to first understand, or the first step in the process is the planning of the work. So Eric, can you describe the ASTERRA planning process, kind of in a general manner that would apply to any particular location, including what's going on in New Mexico?
Sure. As you mentioned, for this project specifically, we're looking at the smaller communities. They're the ones that really need the help. Typically, they don't have the resources to do proactive leak detection to reduce their water loss. And then kind of double trouble, their cost of water is usually higher. That is because they're purchasing it from another person that's producing it, or sometimes even purchasing it from someone else that purchased it. So the cost of water gets to be pretty high. But basically, seeing where we can be of most help, it's really a triage of the areas. I mean, there's a lot of different smaller communities within the state of New Mexico. So seeing which one there is, and then also building the queue for the future of which ones we're going to be, focusing on the future. Because the one thing we don't want to do is we want to keep this operation moving along, because the quicker we can find a leak, the quicker we can start saving people water. So.
And the way the satellite imagery works, how big of an area can the satellite analyze it in any one given pass?
It's about 1,400 square miles. So the opportunity to capture multiple communities that's there. Certainly we can capture a single utility with one satellite image. And even if we couldn't, let's say it's just absolutely massive, we could always layer them. But 1,400 square miles. So satellite from space takes a very big picture.
And that's really kind of very appropriate for New Mexico, because New Mexico is a very rural state. With over 1,000 utilities, around 80% of them have less than 10,000 customers. So because they're so spread out, this seems like it's a technology that is almost purpose designed for a location like New Mexico.
Yeah, like they say, if you got to eat an elephant, eat it one bite at a time. And if you know which bite to take to be the most effective, well, you will be. Yep.
So, Rolf, from the utility perspective, what kinds of information did you provide ASTERRA so that they could most effectively use their remote Earth observation technology to triage the system and identify the most likely leak locations?
Sure. Because of necessity, before ASTERRA came about, we had to rely on the Doppler and the GIS location systems that we had installed. We had literally hundreds of leaks marked on a map, which allowed us to locate hotspots, if you will, in areas of concentration. Because of previous repairs, we also knew what types of pipes were in which areas. For instance, we have cast iron, galvanized PVC, copper. We even had some wooden pipes on the drainage side. That's how old our systems were. So we were able to provide all those things to ASTERRA, which kind of helped them focus on problem areas for us and help us kind of go to areas that we know we needed to detect more leaks.
And Eric, after you received information from the utility, what's the next step? How is the sausage made?
Yeah. So once we get the area of interest, which is basically the boundaries of truth or consequence, we go ahead and get a fresh satellite image. We're not taking old satellite imagery. It's fresh. And we then take their GIS. And when we see within 18 feet of the potable water leaking, we mark that as a point of interest. And because they've already kind of done some homework before where they have these established hotspots throughout the system, what we can then do is start prioritizing. Hey, you know what? We're very binary with these points of interest. Leak, no leak. That's all we know. But it was very valuable to get that information from truth or consequence, because now all of a sudden we can start saying, hey, let's start in these different areas. I mentioned GIS, as I also mentioned, a lot of these communities are very small. If they don't have GIS, we can use roads. We just expand that out just a little bit from 18 feet to 30 feet, because generally there's a correlation between the roads and where the main lines are. So.
And how often does the satellite cover the same area of the Earth?
Well, the exact same area. In other words, we get a completely repeated image. It's every 14 days. We have several different satellites that we use, but really every 90 minutes, this satellite is going, and it's in a polar orbit. So every 90 minutes, it's going around the planet. So we get several on the ascending side that we get an opportunity to, and then we get several on the descending side as well. So, but then that whole cycle repeats again in 14 days.
One thing I'm curious about is where this technology came from. It's my understanding that this was first used to look for water on other planets. Is that really true?
That is true. Yeah. Loren Guy, our founder and current CTO, was part of the project that found water on Mars. They did find water on Mars, 5,000 feet beneath the Martian surface on the South Pole. I think they had a bit more juice in their satellite to find that. We certainly don't have that. But then again, no one's burying pipes. We don't bury them deeper than we need to. So our depth of about 10 feet on average works pretty well.
Right. So Barry and Tony, after ASTERRA analyzes the satellite image and generates a point of interest map, what is your step? And maybe Barry, you can talk a little bit about this from the administrative kind of perspective, and Tony a little bit from the field perspective.
Okay, sure. Be happy to. We communicate with the client and ASTERRA, understand what the expectations are, what the timing is, understand the timeline for the field work, ensure we've got the human and the technical resources available and spooled up and trained up to execute the work. We'll then, assess the risks and lay out the logistics about how we're going to get there and get things started and what we need to do to be able to, to communicate it effectively with the client, as well as cost the project, just to make sure that everything lines up with their expectations there. And then we hand it off to Tony, where the fun work begins. So, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fun work is by, getting out there on the ground and seeing the truthing of these points of interest turning into actual leaks that are going to make an impact for the utility clients. And so we coordinate on the front end with ASTERRA and the utility clients to then coordinate, what the kickoff project date is going to be, and setting up times to talk about specifics about the project, diving in a little bit deeper into those areas of interest that we're going to be investigating and what we're going to be facing there. Are there meters that are located inside of the pits in front of homes, or are we talking about areas that maybe only have curb stops and meters are in the homes, and different logistical items that we're going to have to tackle for the field investigation to be successful. And then get on the same page with the utility client, line out the schedule of our time on site, how many technicians and what the timeframes are going to be for each day's work, and then how that reporting is going to come back to the utility so that they can, take the rest of the steps in, fixing and repairing those leaks to, in the end, have that impact.
Great. So the next step is the actual field work. So Eric, from ASTERRA's perspective, how much do you get involved in the field inspection work? What's your role in that part of the process?
Well, especially when McKim Creed is involved. We've been working with them for a few years now, and we love working with them. They're a preferred person to work with. So they pretty much handle it. But once we deliver the POIs, it's really time for them to get out into the field. So we schedule the acoustic field investigation and really go to each of these points of interest, because at this point, it's really an unverified leak. We're not a pinpointing technology. We're seeing where the water is collecting, not necessarily where it's sourced from, which, as we know, could be in two different places. So what they do is they go to and acoustically listen to each of these different points of interests. They then use our UCollect app, which is an app that works on iPad and iPhone, and as well as Android devices. And their data then is, did they hear a leak or not? If they did hear a leak, tell me more about it. Is it on a main? Is it on a hydrant? Is it on a service line? If it's on a service line, is it on customer side or is it on the utility side? All of this then rolls up into our dashboard called EO Discover. And within that dashboard, then the utility can then see virtual, if they have an internet connection, it's real time. So they're out there seeing it. But for the most part, we're just helping and assisting McKim Creed. At this point, they really have the football.
The dashboard goes, how important of a piece of a puzzle is that? Is that something that ASTERRA spends a lot of time developing and refining so that the voice of the customer is heard and you're providing information that's really useful for the customer? Or is the dashboard more, for ASTERRA and McKim Creed's purposes? Who's the customer of the dashboard?
Well, initially, version 1 was very much just for us and McKim Creed, but now as we're going into version 2, and I believe very shortly we're be deploying a brand new version. So taking in, what leaks, what's going on here, not just if they're verified, but have they been repaired? Obviously, we don't save anything until we actually fix the leak. So that's an important component to close that loop. So you can see it right there on our same dashboard, the status of where it's all going on. It also gives ASTERRA the ability to kind of see how things are going. Is it going on at a good rate, or is it something that maybe we can help implement? And not when McKim Creed is involved, but let's say utilities doing their own work. A lot of times just stuff happens in the world, and we can see when all of a sudden the investigation stopped, and now we're at risk of completing this project, which was the whole purpose of instituting it. So,
right. So Tony, can you give us a quick description of how the actual field work progresses and how you interact with ASTERRA and the utility?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so typically, as we're conducting the inspections of the POIs that have been outlined from ASTERRA, we're covering somewhere in that 3 to 5 per average working day per technician on site. So it kind of gives you an idea of the production. And with that, what we're doing is we're walking through each one of the areas that are outlined and acoustically inspecting all of the assets that are not only within the areas of interest outlined, but as Eric alluded to, beyond that sometimes, especially in instances where there's terrain that would, facilitate the water moving downhill. And so in those situations, we go outside of the areas of interest by several connections or further to make sure that there are no leaks that are culminating down at a low point within the POI or outside the POI, just slightly. And so as we're doing all of that, we first initially start with acoustically sounding all of the fittings that are there. We pick up on where there is evidence of leak noise in the system, and then we follow up with the more comprehensive pinpointing approach and putting that actual mark on the ground where that leak is sourcing from within that 3 to 5 foot area that the utility can come out and dig those locations and not have to spend a lot of time, digging outside of areas that there's not going to be a leak at. And so once we've done that and we've put the mark on the ground, we report all of that information through the ASTERRA application in UCollect so that it transfers over to the dashboard. And like Eric said, in real time, a lot of these utility clients will be viewing that, readily and tracking down those leaks before we even have a daily report come out that tells you, hey, we've completed the investigation on these areas of interest and we've, confirmed these leaks locations. They can go out and take action before, because leak runtime is one of the things that we're always a big proponent of preaching. And that is where we see a lot of that loss and results of that loss be impacted.
I'm curious, a couple of things. One is, Tony, what kind of equipment do you guys use? And, is the same equipment been around for a long period of time? Are there new pieces of equipment available on the acoustic side? Or is that, what kind of equipment do you guys use? And also, how much training do your people have to be able to do this in an efficient manner?
Yeah, good question. And so the equipment is new in the sense that it's advanced from its initial states of just being your standard manual listening devices, where you may have seen the old pictures of people sticking their ear up to metal rods that they're touching the assets with. It's the same premise, except for we're using digitally enhanced noise now. So we're amplifying any noise so that it's easier to hear. We have the ability to set certain frequency thresholds so that we can, filter out noise that's not indicative of leakage and help us to narrow down exactly what the leak is located on, because different pipe materials have different noise frequency ranges of leakage. And so that helps us to be more advanced with technology. And then sometimes we need even more advanced technology than just those manual listening devices, such as correlators that help us to run, timed tests for analyzing the noise, the speed of sound on each of these fittings, and correlating between those two known points where that leakage is sourcing from. We also use a variation of primitive technology, so visible observations, probing the ground in areas and pulling back indications of water saturation around where we've got some of that noise to confirm that we hear noise on this fitting, but really it's 20 feet away where we're getting that noise and the best results from at the ground level. And then we'll use chlorine testing. There's a lot of water in some of these areas that are not produced from distribution pipe. And so it's important to make sure that, that water is chlorinated or showing signatures from that utility treated water to narrow down, the source of that water. And then the second part of that question is, our folks out there, we've got some that have been doing this for, over 20 years time, chasing down leaks. And they started with using those manual rods and listening with their ear. But typically, our technicians come through a regimented training program where they are buddied up with, these other project leads for multiple years before they are, let out to be able doing their own investigation and pinpointing. But generally, you can have a fairly 1 year type of tenured technician that's able to identify noise fairly well. And then you're able to take that up to the next level of technician that can take that noise and turn it into that exact location on the ground. And usually somewhere in that 2 to 5 year range, they're becoming proficient in that. But there are still leaks out there that stump, the best of leak detectors that are out there, because one of the things we face is, Rolf talked about having GIS and the data there. Not all utilities have that. And so that's a key component for tracking down leaks, knowing the pipe materials or knowing the configuration of the system. It plays a huge role in the equipment that we use. So those unknowns can sometimes throw us for a quagmire, and, we have to track down things a little bit differently. But usually, the training is somewhere in that 1 to 5 year range before folks are out there able to find some of those tougher leaks on their own.
Yeah, Ralph, from your perspective, when the guys were out there, did you provide, I'll call it local knowledge, like where the best coffee shop was, where the best donut shop was, that kind of stuff, and also staff to assist the McKim Creed crews?
Sure, we did. We worked hand in glove with the crews because, we fixed over 1,000 water leaks in this community. So we've been everywhere, right? And it's a two-way street. We not only have to show your crews where everything is and the neighborhoods, but we also have to let our neighbors know, hey, there's going to be guys in green shirts and equipment running around the streets and alleyways of your community, and you need to know who we are, right? So we generated a press release. We notified everybody through. We have a local paper still. And I know it's kind of obsolete in days like this, but we actually have a paper. And we notified our customers through various platforms, whether it's Facebook, on our webpage, other social media. So everybody had a chance to figure out, that something is going to happen and that we're going to be there. And of course, we know our areas and we know our customers. We know where the rabbit. I'm not going to say rabbit dogs. We know where the mean dogs are, right? We know where there's problems in certain neighborhoods. And we can forewarn people, and we can also let our neighbors know that, hey, we're going to be there. So yeah, we worked hand in glove with the crews, and it worked out well for us.
Great. And Tony, at the end of the day, what kind of information do you provide the utility? For example, I'm curious, are most of the leaks hidden, or do more leaks kind of have some surfacing water? Sometimes it's hard to relate to a utility. Hey, you have a leak here, and they're like, well, it's dry as a bone. There's no leak there. But so I'm just curious as to what kind of information you provide the utility at the end of the day.
Well, I think
and
go ahead.
Go ahead, Rob.
No, you want me to go ahead?
Well, at the end of the day, we have already provided that information in real time. So that's the good thing, is they don't have to wait to the end of the day. And today's technology is they can track it along the way. But we do follow up every day with, a report on what those findings were. So they have that outline from our project leads as to other details that aren't captured in the dashboard, things we may have encountered or found along the way that just don't seem to fit right or that are out of place. But we also, provide them with information about the leak characteristics that we are finding and helping them to then outline what the steps will be to make those repairs. And water being visible is one of the key indicators for us to provide them, because you're exactly right. There's a lot of times, and it's about 90% of the time, the leaks that we identify are not visible in nature, meaning that the customers aren't going to see them when they're walking down the road with their dogs, or the utility that's driving around their system, they're not going to see them. The only way you're going to find them is by doing a more in-depth, investigation. That's with acoustics or lifting up those different manhole lids or meter boxes to see those leaks. And so, with that, we've had instances where the excavation crews will go out and dig all the way to the pipe and still not see the water leak, and call us and say, hey, this hole doesn't have any leak in it. And we go over there and we'll investigate further and say, you've only dug to the top of the pipe. Let's go another bucket down to the side of the pipe. And sure enough, the leak will show itself at that point. And the different substrates that are out there, causes water to do funny things. But it's always going to find the least resistance and the path that it can take easiest. And in some of these situations with sand or with some clay and situations, that water will be going in locations that are completely opposite of where you would think they would go. And so, making sure the due diligence is put in there, because it does take a few of those times to create believers out of this, right? These crews say that every leak I've ever seen has surfaced. Well, you've not seen the ones that didn't surface because they didn't surface, right? So it's an age-old dilemma that utilities face, and we're always astounded to have those opportunities to prove the technology and to make believers out of it.
And Rolf, how did Truth or Consequences use the information and the recommendations provided by McKim Creed? What was your process once you got this information?
Well, sure. Of course, we immediately plotted the findings of the crews on our overall location maps, right? And we followed some interesting scenarios. For instance, many times we've fixed a leak in one location, but because the pipe was clean, it created pressure upstream, right? And so there was another potential problem for another leak there. And several times we detected leaks that were not seen yet, but were close to the repaired leaks that we had only initiated a couple of weeks ago. So that was important to us. And
did you guys immediately go out and follow up on all the locations that McKim Creed suggested were high priority items. Was that a high priority from your perspective?
Sure. Well, we did what I guess what any good doctor would do, right? We triaged the information and prioritized according to the size of the leaks and the location of the leaks. In other words, are we affecting businesses? Are we affecting a number of customers? Things of that nature. We also determined what types of leaks, whether and if we had to order valves or couplers, or if we needed to make an immediate repair, and if we had the stuff in stock, or did we have to order it? So it triggered a whole comprehensive reaction that we had to get through to get there. We found that many of the leaks were on the customer side. In other words, between the meter and the house of the resident. And so when we located those leaks, that was a great customer tool, because customers didn't know why their bill was so high. And we were able to locate that leak for them and inform them of that leak. Of course, we didn't fix that leak. It's on the customer side, but having that knowledge was a great PR tool for our community.
Great. And so, Eric, what does ASTERRA do to wrap the job up?
Yeah, so towards the end of the job, we will provide a final report, kind of showing them, breaking down what was found, kind of putting some costs to it, and things like that. But if we just look at a synopsis, 42 leaks found in the project, 3 mains, 38 service lines. And I would say with the service lines, well, in general, with our points of interest, I would say typically 20% of every single leak we have, or point of interest we've identified, has another leak in it. Service leaks make a bit more noise. So, I strongly always encourage circle back on those points of interest where you repaired those leaks, especially the service, because you may very well might find that there was another leak there. We had a project up in Green Bay where 3 years in a row they went there. The 4th year, same location, they go there, and this time, previous years it was always a service leak. This time, guess what? It was a main leak, and it had been leaking for some time. So, don't think it's one and done. Sometimes there's another one lurking there. Main lines don't typically make as much sound as service lines. They could mask that. For the overall project, we helped save 149 million gallons in a year, which is great. And as Tony was talking about, in this case, 85% were non-surfaced. So again, we really helped find those that couldn't be found. And AWWA says 50% of the leaks surface. So it's a whole other equation beneath the earth that we're missing out on. And don't forget, even those surface leaks, they need to be seen. A lot of times they're not seen. They're out in some rural area that nobody even knew or thought it was a lake. So that's how it.
Hey, Tony, I wanted to ask you a question. When you provide information to either to support the dashboard or to the customer, do you provide like pictures? What kind of, besides just an Excel spreadsheet? Sometimes that's kind of difficult to really look at. Do you provide some other kind of informational sheet to the utility so that they can visually see what's going on, where the location is, geotag it, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. We collect GPS locations on all of the leak points, as well as provide as much information as we can gather that we know would help the utility in those repair efforts. And we pull that into what we call a leak card or a leak sheet. And it provides the pictures of the areas that the leakage is occurring, our box on the ground, and then, how and why we came to determine the leak is located at that location, as well as information from the data on their system where we can pull that from their GIS or their map books, or even like Rolf talked about, the personnel on the site that are assisting us. They say, yeah, we know this is an old section of cast iron, or is it on a main leak, or is it a fitting leak? And so if it is on a fitting, what kind of fitting is that? So they can order those kind of parts. And then we also give them a urgency level. And so that's where, it's not a perfect science, but based on our experience and the leak sound that we're observing, as well as what type of pipe or fitting it's being observed on, we can give them an estimation of the leak size and urgency. And so, we do the best job to help identify those that are higher or have a more of an impact on something pertaining to water loss, or it could be even, customer safety situations where leaks are running into areas that could influence in cold weather, freezing and causing road hazards or things like that, so that they can prioritize those leaks exactly as Rolf talked about in order to triage the ones that are worse to begin with. But overall, we want them to continue following up on all of them, because some of these leaks we find in the moment may be small at that time, but they do get larger with size. And so, the urgency is one of the key items that we provide to them. But all that's in that single sheet you saw there, so that it makes it easier for their repair crews to have as much information as we can gather while we're on site to then go and do their jobs and make those repairs.
One of the other things I'm curious about, the points of interest, cover, I don't know, maybe 1,000 feet, linear feet of pipe and within the area. When you go out and you find a leak, do you just, say, okay, my work here is done, and you go on to the next point of interest? Or do you find sometimes more than one leak in a point of interest?
Yeah, and exactly like Eric talked about, leaks can mask other leaks. And so we have some situations where we can identify when there are multiple leaks inside of an area of interest. And it could be a few small leaks inside the area where, one's not impacting the ability to hear another one. Or it could be where we have indications of a secondary leak possibly being in the area, but need that first leak repaired in order to finish and find that second leak. But whether we find a leak on the very first fitting that we sound or the next to last, we always continue on, because we have had such good success in finding multiple leaks within these areas of interest that we want to make sure everything that could have been highlighting that leak indication that ASTERRA is picking up is followed up on. And of course, for the utility side, missing one in that area isn't going to benefit them. So we want to make sure that everything in that area has been investigated, and anything that can be found with acoustics is identified. And
Rolf, were you able to kind of calculate in some way, shape, or form the lost water reduction? Are you using this information in your capital planning program for pipe replacement?
Sure, we use it a couple of different ways. So we know that, for instance, we meter what goes into our storage tanks. So we know how much water we're pumping. We also know, when we meter the public, we know how much water they're using. And the difference is our loss, right? So we lose between 20 and 40% of our water. And for a desert community, that's just catastrophic. And so we needed to find a solution to this problem and get this thing taken care of. So this is another tool in our box. We are able to locate these leaks on our own to some degree, but this opened up the door for us to find additional leaks. And what that did for us is it has allowed us to comprehensively approach our legislature and say, hey, these are where all the leaks are. These are the leaks that we didn't even know we had, and then ask for money. And so we were pretty successful at that. And so you throw all those things together, and it's a great program.
Great. So at the end of the day, found 42 leaks in 40 points of interest. And as Eric said, 23 of those leaks are on the customer side of the meter. About 100 gallons a minute of lost water was recovered. And I just want to mention some performance metrics. On average, ASTERRA projects find about 3.7 leaks per crew day and 2.6 leaks per mile inspected. In Truth or Consequences, the performance was a little better, 3.5 leaks found per mile and 4.2 leaks found per day. Just as a kind of comparison, without the ASTERRA triaging the system, the traditional boots on the ground projects, where inspectors would just randomly search from one point of the system to another, the average is 0.3 leaks per mile and 1.3 leaks per day. So you can really see the benefit of the ASTERRA system, surveying the system, the entire system, and identifying those areas that have high clusters of leaks. So McKim Creed and ASTERRA have worked on over 90 projects together, where ASTERRA did the broad survey work and McKim Creed did the pinpointing. They investigated over 8,500 points of interest and found 4,400 leaks. A very impressive partnership. And so now we're kind of at the end of our planned discussions. We have about a minute to go. I don't know if any of the panelists would, kind of like to say anything about a particular lesson learned from this particular project. I know one issue is, in Truth or Consequences, there's very high hot springs groundwater, which could have had an impact on some of the work. But I don't know if anybody has any particular item that they would like to mention before we go into the questions and answers.
I can talk a little bit about our thermal waters if you'd like.
Sure.
So our downtown area is located on a bed of thermal springs, hot water up to 104 degrees. And so that gives us a lot of false leak things that show up for us in our communities. So if we have a leak in downtown area, we don't know if it's a water line leak, if it's our thermal waters, or what the heck it is. The one thing that we can do is we can test it for chlorine, right? So we know that our thermal waters don't have chlorine in them. So if we have chlorine, we know we have a leak, but it compounds the issues for us. Our thermal waters are only about 3 to 4 feet deep in a lot of areas in our downtown area. So it causes a lot of issues, not only in leak detection, but also in building, settling, and things like that. So it's been pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And Rolf,
And
what-
ASTERRA synthetic aperture radar is extremely sensitive to water. So we do see all types of water, including the hot springs, including the leaks. And because we're using a long wavelength, which gives us the depth penetration to about 10 feet, it also gives us the opportunity to differentiate the different types of water. The good thing is everybody likes our water to taste about the same across the planet. And we do that by typically treating it with chlorine, chloramine, and or fluoride. And that changes the conductivity of the water. So now we can differentiate the different types. So even if you have high water tables, we've got wonderful success in the state of Florida, where they have pretty high water tables. But because we can differentiate, we're not just finding water in general and hope it's leaking water. No, we're actually identifying potable water leaking or wastewater. That also has a unique look to it. So we can filter out the hot springs and other groundwater that might be that might confuse other methods.
So now we'll go into some questions. I think Barry, are you going to be
I'll be moderating
the questions?
Yeah, Paul, this is Parker, I'll be moderating.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That section. So one of the questions that we got here is, what is the impact of this leak detection work on the customer rates, that kind of stuff?
I can answer that if you'd like. So we just recently had a commission meeting and we had to discuss the potential for rate increases. So the impact of not finding ways to detect and repair leaks results in us having to go through steps like that because somebody's got to pay for it, right? So to avoid this, we use the information on the water leak detection systems that we put into place, and we put a capital projects plan together. And then we use that to approach the legislature and ask them for money. To date, we've received over $50 million for our community. Now, our community is 6,000 people. That is a boon for us. That's tremendous. It's tremendous impact. We know we have a $120 million project, so it's not going to get us all the way through, right? But what a start. And it's kind of nice and gratifying that we're putting the first $5 million into the ground starting next year. We're going to fix 17,000 linear feet of water. So that's the culmination. That's the end product of what we're trying to achieve. And that's why we need all this information up front in order for us to be able to get that.
That's awesome. The next question comes from Taylor Wilson. He asks, can this be used in urban environments like South Florida? Does it have sewer, stormwater applications, or is it only potable water?
Yeah, absolutely. We can see through asphalt, concrete, vegetation, obviously all types of weather and everything that Florida and Miami would have. So it can see through all of that. What was the last part of the question, Parker?
Does it have implications with
wastewater and stormwater,
or is it only potable?
So we can help with wastewater on extrusion. We don't see into the pipes. We're seeing the saturated soil. So we can't help with stormwater necessarily, going in there, or infiltration into wastewater, but certainly exfiltration we can help with. I'll
make one comment there, Parker, just to kind of tag along to that. a lot of what happens in the I&I world, and in the wastewater side as well, happens with the same on the ground investigative technologies. So we can take the combination of what ASTERRA is being able to provide, again, join that with boots on the ground, just like you heard about on the potable side, and be able to work that through some I&I issues as well.
And Barry, is that the work that our sort of smoke testing would be the boots on the ground to solve that?
It's very similar. Yes. Smoke testing. We can do CCTV work inside the pipe, and just, various types of on the ground investigation there as well.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I don't mind jumping in there a little bit on the urban part of that question, because as the field investigator, the urban environment actually is more conducive to the boots on the ground portion of what we do with the ASTERRA follow-ups, because ASTERRA is identifying where they have saturation, and the only way to go in and pinpoint those leaks is, one, dig all the pipe up in that area of interest, which is not feasible, or two, use acoustics to pinpoint exactly where it's coming from. And in those urban environments, typically we have a whole lot of connections to the water line that aid in our ability to, one, identify where that leak noise is, and then use to pinpoint exactly where it's sourcing from. So we have really great results in urban environments, typically because the acoustics are that much more favorable in those conditions than they are in some of these rural areas that have very limited connections. And you take a lot more comprehensive approach of having to sound over the pipe, which takes extremely, amounts of time longer than it does when you have available fittings to investigate.
Excellent point.
That's awesome. Okay, the next question comes from Raymond, and he asks, out of 100 leaks found by satellite, how many leaks were actually found on site to be accurate with the information provided? Were some of these pinpoint style leaks or most large style leaks? And then I got to click the more to get the rest of that question. And he said, what are areas and terrain that cause problems? So that'll be a second question. First question is, out of that 100 leaks found by satellite, how many leaks were actually found on site to be accurate with the information provided?
I think it was pretty close to 50% of the leaks that we of the points of interest had leaks. Or if you divide the number of points of interest divided by the number of leaks found. Well, and then that one leak that we showed actually had 2 leaks on it, believe it or not, the one we showed the leak cards on. But it's roughly about 50%. In different areas have different results. It really depends on how much PVC do you have, how deep is the pipe. Every place is different. So what might happen, what might be the benchmark for, let's say, Texas, is completely different in northern Wisconsin. But the one thing that we can always say, by going to where the leak is occurring and going to that place, we will make any team more effective, to the tune of 3 to 4 times. Obviously you have high levels of PVC and deep pipe. You're just not going to find it, but you almost need it more because you need to go to an area and as Tony mentioned, you need to listen to every single appurtenance you possibly can. That's your only hope. When we see there's a leak, there's 80 to 90%, we're 80 to 90% certain there's a leak, but we can see a leak as small as 0.2 gallons per minute, believe it or not, with a satellite. And to acoustically hear that, good luck. I mean, it's near impossible. I kind of think of it as going to the dentist and getting your teeth checked, and they do an x-ray and they say, you know what, see a small cavity here. Nothing we're going to do on right now, but we're going to keep an eye on it. And that's what I tell people, keep an eye on these things, as Tony mentioned earlier as well. Leaks don't fix themselves. They either get worse or they persist. So follow back up in 6 months, include that for the next year to see, did this leak progress to a point that there's something to be done about it? If it can't be heard, it's probably not worth actually digging up. It probably isn't. And so I always think of it as, going to the dentist and they say you don't have any cavities. Was it a wasted trip? Well, no, you're doing a very proactive approach to your health care and your teeth, and hopefully in the end prevents further cavities. So kind of the same approach to it, proactively finding your leaks before they become a big issue.
Yeah, and Eric, that seems to answer one of the questions of, is this sort of a once and done kind of thing, or is it something that is scheduled throughout, that you're trying to make sure that you're repeating and being proactive?
Yeah, well, water systems are living. They through physics and entropy, things just go chaotic and break, and that's a known thing moving as we move through time. So I think of it as a diet. Yes, we can get to our results where we're at, but as soon as we go off our diet, what's going to happen? It's going to go right back to where it was. So, once we can kind of take the leak detect or our water loss to a point that we're comfortable with, we're probably not going to, there's a law of diminishing returns that, we don't want to chase it all the way down to zero. That's impossible. But once we get it to a manageable level, now we can move into a maintenance. Maybe we're only doing one scan a year. Maybe we're doing a scan every other year, whatever we're doing, but you can't ignore it. It's once you start this journey, you're on it. And if you deviate and you stop doing it, well, guess what? Your predecessors from you, probably in 5 or 10 years, you're going to be back on. Someone's going to be back on that journey, and they'll be just as critical as it was when you started.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next question I'm going to ask is from Brooke. He asks, what techniques do you use to pinpoint leaks on PVC pipe once found by the satellite? I think, Tony, this might be a good one for you.
Yeah, and that kind of alludes to that last question. We're hitting across those numbers that Paul laid out for the, 8,000 plus POIs that we've hit. We're usually around that 50% mark. And I usually attribute that to not a lack of the satellite seeing an accurate leak, but probably more often it's going to be the lack of the acoustics being able to find that leak. Some of those very, very small ones, that the comprehensive approach to find that with sounding every foot over top of the line is tougher in those PVC environments. But also, some of the techniques that we have available are going into the water column with correlations, which is a lot more sensitive and would be needed for long spans of PVC. Generally, we attack the areas of interest with sounding all of the fittings in the area to find those leaks that can be heard with that process. And then we mark areas in there that we find that don't have a lot of fittings as unverifiable during using that approach, and then leave it up to the utility client to say, okay, we have enough problems that we have to go find from the ones you investigated this way to fix first. And then maybe we circle back to those ones that we considered unverifiable using the fittings, which are generally PVC without a lot of connections, to take that more comprehensive approach on those. And that's probing over the line and ground miking over the line and sounding it at very short intervals to find that tougher leakage to hear in those environments that don't have fittings available to us. And so with PVC, it can definitely be a lot tougher, but not having fittings available is one key item that we kind of outline where leaks could be missed using the standard acoustic approach, and maybe diving into some of those more advanced technologies or comprehensive approaches could help yield better results in those environments.
Awesome. And I'm going to go back to Raymond's second question, because I thought that was a really good one, where he asks, what are areas and terrain that may cause problems for this sort of satellite technology? I think Eric, that one might be.
Like Eric can answer first.
Yeah,
I'll go to the boots on the ground after that.
I mean, different things, rocks, obviously, if it just, the soil conditions, it just leaks right through. We don't see it, but if we see a leak, there's a leak there. We're not going to give you a false positive due to soil. But are there some that are missed that it just the water just transits down into some deep underwater cave? Yeah, that'll happen. We're not going to have that, and that's just kind of the nature of it. But the difference between desert or forest, both of that we can see through vegetation, so we're not really tricked by forest. Same thing with desert; it's pretty easy for us to see. High water table really doesn't affect us. Really it's pretty much all terrain. We're just fine. We can see through.
Eric, one thing I'm curious about is, does like being near an airport where there's a lot of other radar signals, does that impact the signal?
Yeah. So the signals we're using is 1 to 2 gigahertz range, which is a pretty congested. That's where Wi-Fi networks are, cell phones. Nobody has cordless phones anymore, thank goodness, but that was on the same thing, and even airport radar. So yeah, near an airport, we can. It takes that's really our production that we have to do, is clean these images up so that we can actually see them. So we have a lot of machine learning and AI that's going through and cleaning the imagery up so that we can affect it. But yeah, certainly an airport radar can affect it.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, the satellite can see through all those things, but walking through them is a totally different equation, right? Sometimes these lines are run in areas that, one, are very, very difficult to navigate the terrain.
Mhm.
2 could be through swamps where you just can't navigate it at all.
Tidal marsh.
And there are, environmental impacts to being able to do some of those things. So from the boots on the ground perspective, that usually is where we, have some limitations more so than the satellite does, is where those pipes have been put in to begin with. Questionable to start, but then trying to follow up on leakage in those locations can be near impossible in some scenarios.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
I don't know, Tony. I think you could like swim through that and figure something out.
Sometimes we get lucky.
Yeah. The next question is, can sensor waves see through pavements and into the soil below? I think, Eric, that question's for you.
Yeah, we certainly can. Concrete, asphalt, all types of soils. The only thing we can't see through is metal. That's really the big limitation. And then also surfaced water, believe it or not. You would think that would be such a gimme, is surfaced water, but a lot of times the way the radar, radar is just, the R part of radar is radio. So it's just sending it on a radio signal down and then getting the return back. So what happens is when it hits the water, it just bounces back up into space and we don't get a return. But that's the other 50% of the surface leaks that at least the utilities have a shot at finding. Someone in the community or their crew will find those. We really are really good at finding those subsurface leaks that you have no clue.
Yeah, and we've got a question from Elliot who asked, does the satellite data determine the amount of estimated water loss? If so, how is that algorithm calculated, by surface area or gallons per GPR?
Yeah, when we initially started, we thought we had some input on that, that we could tell. But one thing we quickly realized was we can't tell if it's a small leak for a long period of time or a big leak for a short period of time. We're working on methods in the future to see if we can add more value there. But right now, we're limited to a single satellite pass flying over at 17,000 miles an hour and taking a quick image. So we can't tell at that point. If we did, multiple scans and then compare and contrast, then we can have some insight on that. But typically we're taking 2 images, moving them together in a short period of time. And it's very binary. Leak, no leak.
Yeah. And we've got,
that's where the boots on the ground kind of comes in. We give our best ability based on what we're hearing and seeing out there to put an estimate on the size of that leakage. But even that becomes quite difficult when, the various different pressures for systems that are out there, what is that leak being forced through, the pipe size of the hole, leaks only create this noise, which is indicative of, how big it may be. But once you get above a certain threshold, or if that water has been encased, the leak's encased in water, those things can, muffle the noise. So we do our best job there, but really until you dig that leak up and you can put an actual measurement on the size of the split or the hole, or, see where it was leaking from a fitting, that's where you can really start to put some of the numbers behind it. And to ASTERRA's point on their dashboard, as those repairs come in, the utility can update the size of those leaks to help, truth some of those leak sizes and provide that ROI side of the equation.
Yeah. Well, that does mean that we are over time. We're at 1 p.m., which is good. But I've got one more question that we'll ask. We've had a lot of great questions asked in the comments, so we will make sure that we follow up with everyone based on those questions. But the last question that we're going to ask is this one's for Rolf. What can a community do to help prepare to receive this service and sort of make that possible?
Sure. I'm representing a small community. We all have these people in our community that have the institutional knowledge, right? The guys that when he retires, all the knowledge goes with him. We wanted to avoid that. So we hired or we worked with an engineering firm that took all of our old maps and digitized everything. And so we literally had a truckload of maps that we had digitized and put in a format so that when we were able to start using Doppler and GIS systems, we were able to plot them on these digitized maps. So that really helped us get started with this and work well for us. The other thing I would urge communities to do is that these maps should include things like where, make sure the lines are plotted, mapped, the description of the water lines, what they're made of, where they are, if possible, the length, the depth, the diameter, and the material, of course, of what these pipes are. So that kind of gives a person an idea where they should start looking and what to do. So these maps, like I said, they'll help us find hotspots, and these are the locations we're going to start hitting first and get through the system. So that's kind of what we did as in our community.
That's a great answer. I think, Paul, I'll hand it to you to kind of wrap up, and then any questions that we didn't get to, we will make sure that we do follow up with.
Great. Thanks, Parker. Yeah, I think very good discussion. I think hopefully everybody got a good idea of how the three entities work together and collaborate to make sure that the most value is achieved through this service, and take a good lesson from Truth or Consequences in how they prepared, followed up, fixed the leaks, analyzed the value proposition, and then used that information to petition the state for additional funds to improve their system overall. So I think there is it starts with Truth or Consequences. Well, it starts with truth and it ends with consequences. Maybe that's the best way I can say it.
Yeah. And the consequences are positive.
Positive consequences. There you go. All right. So yeah, I think you guys laid out the story great. I really appreciate it. And that's kind of the end of our program. Maybe Parker, you can provide some information as to where the recording of this will be, where folks can find it later on, and then I think we're done.
Yeah. So the recording of this event will be on the LinkedIn Live page, so you'll be able to find the event there and play it back later. So in case you missed a section or something like that, you can access it there. It will also be on the McKim Creed YouTube channel, and we'll also be distributing it out to all the panelists. So I believe it might end up on the ASTERRA YouTube channel as well.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to all the panelists. As always, you guys did a great job. I really appreciate the time. And have everybody have a nice rest of your day. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Appreciate it.